When a system in your life is about to fail, you usually expect some kind of warning.
Right, like a heads up.
Exactly. A clear, unambiguous signal, like, I don't know, the check engine light on your dashboard or that low battery notification on your phone.
Yeah, you see the warning, you plug it in, you fix the problem. It's a very comforting illusion, honestly.
It really is. But then you look at the state of the world right now, and I mean, it feels less like a single check engine light and more like the entire dashboard is just flashing red.
Oh, absolutely. The steering wheel is vibrating, the radio is playing static.
Exactly. And you were just trying to figure out what to fix first and whether these alarms are isolated glitches or part of one massive interconnected system failure.
Yeah, which is the absolute definition of compounding crises. We are watching localized pressure points buckle, and the shock waves are traveling across the globe in real time, hitting systems we didn't even realize were connected.
And that is exactly why we are here with you today for this deep dive. Whether you are prepping for a major meeting or trying to make sense of a chaotic news cycle on your commute, or you're just insanely curious about how the world actually works.
We're your shortcut to being well-informed.
Right. Today, our mission is to synthesize a stack of intense global reporting. We're going to connect the dots between geopolitical shockwaves in the Middle East, unprecedented civil unrest in Latin America, and the literal atmosphere acting up back home.
And just a quick note before we jump in, because we are diving into incredibly charged reporting today, ranging from U.S. foreign policy and active wars to the actions of the Trump administration, we have to lay some ground rules.
Yes, very important.
We are leaving our own politics at the door. Our job today isn't to take sides or tell you what to think. We are strictly here to impartially report on the content provided by these sources, lay out the varying viewpoints, and help you understand the landscape.
Exactly. We aren't endorsing any of this, just unpacking the facts as reported so you can make up your own mind. So let's start with the loudest alarm on the global dashboard. The escalating war with Iran is now in its third week.
Week 3 already. Yeah.
And NBC is reporting over 1,200 dead in Iran alone. But what really caught my eye isn't just the sheer number of casualties. It's the specific tactical strikes Israel is confirming.
Yeah, they've taken out some really top-tier leadership.
Including a man named Ali Larijani, along with his son, the head of the Baathi militia, and the intelligence minister. Now, I understand taking out an intelligence minister, but who is Ali Larijani? Why does his death matter so much to the broader picture?
Well, his death is a massive structural shift. In the complex ecosystem of Iranian politics, he wasn't really considered a moderate by Western standards.
Okay.
But internally, he was viewed as a pragmatist. And here's why that matters so much. When you are engaged in a conflict, eventually you need someone on the other side to negotiate with.
You need someone to actually pick up the phone.
Precisely. You need an insider who has the institutional authority to make a deal and make it stick. Larijani was widely seen as one of the few surviving figures who could have played that diplomatic role.
Oh, wow. So with him gone, it leaves a dangerous vacuum.
It really does. It raises the question of who is actually left to negotiate if and when it's time to talk de-escalation.
And honestly, it doesn't seem like anyone is looking for a phone right now anyway. The retaliation from Iran sounds incredibly severe.
It's escalating.
I was reading the reports about them firing cluster munitions over Tel Aviv. NBC highlighted this tragic detail about an elderly couple who were killed just trying to run to their bomb shelter.
Yeah, it's awful.
But help me understand the mechanics here. Why are these specific weapons causing so much panic compared to standard missiles?
It basically comes down to how they function in the air. A standard missile is a single projectile with a single trajectory. Israel's Iron Dome defense system is generally very good at tracking and intercepting those.
Right, we've seen that work before.
Exactly. But these cluster munitions, they explode at a high altitude and scatter dozens of deadly bomblets. Each one is about the size of a soccer ball.
Oh, man.
And they scatter over a massive area. Because they spread out so widely and unpredictably, they're incredibly difficult for air defense systems to fully intercept.
Which is why human rights groups are actively warning this might be a war crime.
Right.
Using these in densely populated civilian areas.
Exactly. And Iran isn't just targeting Israel with this technology. The reporting mentioned they are utilizing drone swarms against neighboring countries, too.
Yeah, systematically paralyzing Dubai with drone attacks and hitting Qatar so hard that the Qatari government is publicly begging for a ceasefire. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the geographic location of all this violence isn't just a localized political problem, it's a massive global mathematical problem.
You're talking about the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, all of this is happening right around the strait, which is a single narrow waterway that handles roughly 20% of the world's oil supply. And right now, it is severely compromised.
Yeah, we are seeing only a tiny trickle of tankers making it through.
And mostly from nations friendly to Iran, like China and Pakistan. And the ripple effect is immediate. Oil is hovering around $100 a barrel. I was reading that Iraq is panicking and desperately pivoting to pump its oil through a pipeline in Turkey instead.
Which is a logistical impossibility if the goal is to stabilize the global market.
Right. I was thinking about this. Trying to replace the Strait of Hormuz with a single pipeline in Turkey is like cutting the main artery of global commerce and expecting the world economy to survive on capillary blood flow.
That is a perfect analogy.
I mean, a pipeline moves a fixed, limited volume of oil. The strait is an open ocean highway. The math simply doesn't work.
And what's fascinating here is how quickly that geopolitical artery blockage translates to your daily life. A localized conflict thousands of miles away instantly hits your wallet at the gas pump.
Yeah, you definitely feel it immediately.
But beyond the economics, it becomes a domestic security issue. NBC noted heightened security alerts at U.S. synagogues and mosques right now. Counterterrorism officials have genuine fears that the chaos could activate sleeper cells linked to Iranian proxies, targeting vulnerable communities right here at home.
Which brings us to the political fallout in Washington. President Trump pushed for an international coalition to protect the Strait of Hormuz. But European allies, specifically the UK and Germany, they outright refused.
Yeah, they explicitly said this war is not ours.
Exactly. And Trump warned that he would remember who didn't support the U.S., though he later went on Truth Social to say that the U.S. never did need NATO's help anyway.
Right.
But it's the internal fracture within the U.S. intelligence community that I find really striking. The director of the National Counterterrorism Center, Joe Kent, just resigned in protest. What is the mechanism behind a resignation like that? How do intelligence officials look at the exact same data and completely disagree on the threat?
It fundamentally comes down to how you interpret an imminent threat. Kent stated that he could not support the war because he believes Iran posed no immediate direct threat to the U.S. homeland.
He also openly blamed the conflict on pressure from Israel, didn't he?
He did. He's looking at the intelligence and seeing a regional conflict that the U.S. is being dragged into.
And the personal tragedy embedded in his resignation letter is so heavy. Kent's wife died in a 2019 terror bombing in Syria.
Yeah, that context is crucial.
He specifically wrote that he couldn't support sending the next generation to die in a war that serves no benefit to the American people.
And Trump responded by calling Kent weak on security. Meanwhile, the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, publicly defended the president. She stated that as commander-in-chief, Trump reviewed the intelligence and concluded the threat was imminent.
Wow.
This exchange perfectly encapsulates the fog of war. You have top officials evaluating the same global landscape and arriving at wildly different conclusions about what constitutes a justifiable risk.
And when that fog of war gets thick, the margin for error completely disappears. Tragic accidents become inevitable.
Like what just happened in Iraq?
Yes, the Pentagon just confirmed that horrific accident in western Iraq. A U.S. military KC-135 Stratotanker crashed, killing 6 service members. The youngest was a 28-year-old sergeant, the oldest a 38-year-old captain. And the military had to specifically rush out a statement clarifying that this was not an Iranian attack.
And for context, a KC-135 Stratotanker isn't a fighter jet. It's a massive aerial refueling plane. It's essentially a flying gas station.
Right.
When a massive plane like that goes down in a region that is already a tinderbox, every single spark, even an accidental one, threatens to ignite the whole thing. The military's rush to clarify shows just how close we are to accidental escalation.
Oh, that bottleneck in the Strait of Hormuz doesn't just bump up prices at your local gas pump, though. It creates a domino effect that literally turns the lights out in countries that rely entirely on imported fuel.
Yeah, the vulnerability of global energy is paralyzing.
And right now, we are seeing the extreme end of that mathematical reality playing out in Cuba. Telemundo is reporting absolute, total darkness. Over 60% of the country is completely disconnected from the grid, and they haven't had a single drop of oil enter the country since January.
When you strip away a society's foundational resource, like when the power plant physically doesn't have the crude oil to burn,
The lights go out.
Right. And the social contract breaks down very quickly.
The Telemundo footage paints this vivid, heartbreaking picture of daily life. Cubans are literally jumping out of bed the second the electricity flashes on. They just rush to cook food and do household chores before the grid inevitably collapses into another long blackout.
Mm-hmm. You can only live on the edge like that for so long before something snaps.
And we are seeing that breaking point.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle of the night, in a town called Moron, in Ciego de Avila, protesters actually sacked a Communist Party headquarters. They dragged the furniture out into calle and set it on fire.
The visuals coming out of there are stunning.
There was this incredibly striking visual of a young man who wrapped himself in the Cuban flag, climbed a pole, while the crowd below was screaming Libertad and demanding the end of communism.
But the regime's response to that level of desperation was entirely kinetic. Police fired tear gas and live rounds into the crowd. Telemundo captured footage of at least one young man being shot in the leg.
How does the Cuban government even attempt to control the narrative when the country is literally on fire and in the dark?
Well, President Diaz-Canel took to social media. He tweeted that while the public's frustration over the blackouts is understandable, the vandalism is not. They've already arrested 5 people.
Wow.
It's a classic crisis management tactic, Acknowledge the pain, but criminalize the reaction. Meanwhile, President Trump spoke from the Oval Office, stating that it would be an honor to take Cuba.
Wait, I need to stop you there because NBC reported on this bizarre economic plan Cuba is trying to roll out in the middle of all this chaos.
Oh, right. The new policy.
Yeah. Cuba's economic czar gave an interview saying that for the first time, Cuban exiles can now own businesses on the island. I'm struggling to see the logic here. Inviting foreign business owners into a country with no power, no fuel, and active riots in the streets.
It's definitely a stretch.
It sounds like inviting people to renovate a house while it's actively on fire and the lights are out. Who is actually taking that deal?
It's an incredibly difficult sell, largely because the mechanics of international business simply don't function in a vacuum. The Cuban vice prime minister essentially admitted this. He noted that the U.S. embargo makes attracting capital essentially impossible.
Just because of the legal restrictions.
Exactly. The embargo isn't just a symbolic gesture. It's a functional blockade on the mechanisms of modern commerce. It cuts off access to international financing, technology transfers, and massive consumer markets.
Makes sense.
But the Miami exiles are pointing out an even deeper structural flaw in the offer. They argue that an economic opening is completely meaningless without a political one.
You mean like basic rights?
Right. You can't safely invest capital if there are no foundational property rights and no independent judiciary to protect your investment from being arbitrarily seized by the state.
Right. For you, the listener trying to make sense of this, the takeaway here is really about policy stress testing. We are watching the U.S. try 2 completely opposite diplomatic strategies at the exact same time.
How so?
Well, right next door in Venezuela, the U.S. flag is officially flying at the embassy in Caracas again. They have reestablished diplomatic relations, which had been broken since 2019 when the U.S. backed opposition leader Juan Guaido.
It is a profound contrast. You have the U.S. opening diplomatic channels in Venezuela while simultaneously maintaining an economic chokehold on Cuba. And that chokehold, combined with the global energy crisis, is pushing the island to the brink of collapse.
But the Venezuela situation is so complex. At the exact same time they were opening diplomatic doors, a federal judge in New York just refused to dismiss narco-terrorism charges against Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores. How does a country negotiate with a leader it is actively trying to prosecute?
Yeah, that legal maneuvering is intricate. The defense team for Maduro argued that the Trump administration froze the very funds they needed to pay their lawyers, claiming it prevented an adequate defense.
And the judge didn't buy it.
No, the judge ruled that those financial restrictions don't justify annulling the entire criminal case.
Yeah.
So you have a situation where diplomatic normalization is happening on one track, while federal prosecution is running on a parallel track.
That sounds messy.
Very. It shows how fragmented foreign policy can be when geopolitical needs like securing access to Venezuelan oil to offset Middle Eastern losses collide with domestic legal mandates.
And, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if we look at those compounding systemic failures, when human infrastructure fails alongside natural infrastructure, that brings us to what is happening right here at home.
It isn't just geopolitical and economic systems breaking down right now.
Exactly. The actual physical systems of our planet are acting in extreme, chaotic ways. Just look at the map for a second. A historic blizzard has completely buried the Midwest.
The footage is wild.
It really is. The footage coming out of Michigan shows neighborhoods completely submerged under mountains of snow that are reaching as high as the roofs of houses.
Hmm.
You have sub-zero wind chills freezing cars onto the highways in Green Bay.
Mm.
But then you look at the West Coast, and it is baking. The National Weather Service issued extreme heat warnings. Los Angeles is hitting 96 degrees, and Phoenix is at 100 degrees.
Which is 20 degrees above normal for March.
Yeah. And because it's so incredibly hot and dry, there are catastrophic wildfires ripping through Nebraska that have already burned 700,000 acres and left one person dead.
It is a nation dealing with profound extremes at both ends of the spectrum simultaneously.
Yes.
But what makes these extreme weather events so deeply disruptive is that the human infrastructure we rely on to navigate them is also failing.
Right, and this is where the policy stress test becomes incredibly literal for the average person. Right in the middle of this massive weather convergence, which is stranding thousands of spring break travelers, we have a government shutdown.
Which means TSA agents aren't getting paid.
Exactly. So what happens? They call in sick in droves,
Mhm.
security checkpoints are closing, and major transit hubs like airports in Houston and Atlanta are basically turning into massive makeshift sleeping quarters for stranded passengers.
This is the multiplier effect of systemic failure.
Yeah.
When a functioning government, which is required to do basic things like pay the people who secure our travel infrastructure, breaks down at the exact same time that a historic blizzard and a record heat wave strike, the systems can't compensate for each other.
They just call.
Right. A snowstorm is a natural event. An airport turning into a refugee camp because security staff can't afford to work for free is a human systemic failure.
And as if all of that wasn't enough, just when things couldn't get more surreal, a massive daytime boom physically shook the state of Ohio.
Oh, the Cleveland meteor.
Yes. NASA had to step in and confirm that a 7-ton, 6-foot diameter meteor fractured in the Earth's atmosphere right over Cleveland.
Which is a remarkable, entirely random anomaly.
But think about your own day, right?
Yeah.
Think about trying to live your normal life in this environment. If you're trying to fly out of a frozen airport and you can't because unpaid TSA agents are calling in sick,
Right.
while you're reading that gas is hitting $100 a barrel because of a war shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, and the local news is telling you that actual meteors are exploding over Ohio, I mean, doesn't it feel like you've been dropped into the plot of a Hollywood disaster movie?
It does feel cinematic, I'll give you that. But it requires a very grounded perspective to understand what is actually a threat and what is just noise.
Okay, fair.
The meteor over Cleveland. That is an anomaly. We can marvel at it. And as the expert Ralph Harvey pointed out, it's just space debris, not a prehistoric comet coming to wipe us out.
Thank goodness for that.
Exactly. But the extreme weather and the failing travel infrastructure, those aren't anomalies. Those are vulnerabilities.
Wow, yeah, that's a great distinction.
They show us exactly how fragile our modern conveniences are. We assume the planes will fly, the power will stay on, and the gas will flow. But when human systems fracture concurrently with extreme natural stress, it reveals how thin the ice we're skating on truly is.
So what does this all mean for you as you go about your week? We've covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have.
But we started by unpacking the violent, complex geopolitics of Middle Eastern oil, exploring why the Strait of Hormuz is an irreplaceable artery and the tragic human costs of the fog of war. We looked at the desperate, dark streets of Cuba and the intricate, paradoxical legal battles surrounding Venezuela to understand how foreign policy stress tests actually play out. And we ended with blizzards, heat waves, failing airports, and exploding space rocks. Understanding these extreme events isn't about panicking. It is about recognizing the patterns and the mechanisms of how our world operates. It helps us navigate our own increasingly unpredictable daily lives when we know how all these unseen gears are turning.
And as you process all of these interconnected events, I want to leave you with one final thing to mull over.
Okay.
We've seen how quickly an international conflict thousands of miles away can threaten the global oil supply. And we've seen, through the lens of Cuba, how entirely paralyzing it is for a society when it loses access to that foundational power source. The grid simply dies.
Yeah, it just shuts down.
But when you look at the extreme weather simultaneously battering the U.S. grid from coast to coast, from sub-zero blizzards to unprecedented heat waves, it raises a critical question. If our own domestic infrastructure is already buckling under the weight of nature, how long until a global energy shock and a domestic climate disaster collide at the exact same time? And more importantly, is your community prepared for when they do?
Man, it's the ultimate systemic stress test. And suddenly that flashing check engine light on the dashboard doesn't seem so easy to ignore.
Not at all.
Thank you for joining us today and letting us help you cut through the noise. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking for those hidden connections, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.